Bum, 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 bum. Mhm. Mhm. What? Huh. It says I'm live on YouTube. There's Daniel. Hey, you got a whole bunch of cameras happening.
One. It goes off and on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you really quiet. Can you hear me okay? Or now it says you're on mute, Daniel.
Because you can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay. Oh, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. All right, sir. Good to see you. Welcome back. Thanks for playing the game that we're going to have. We're going to discuss a specific question tonight. This should be fun. But you want to hear the little background story as to why I thought this would be a good topic?
Well, go for it.
All right. I remember being a little boy one time on my swing, and I'm swinging on my swing, and I had my dog. His name was Duke. He was a boxer. He was beside me, and I'm swinging on the swing, just having this great old time. And then I asked my mom, I said, "Hey, mom, why do women wear bras?" And then the next thing I remember, I'm getting up off the dirt, spitting dirt out of my mouth because she had backhanded me when I asked her that question. And it always confused me as to why she was so upset with me asking that question. Because like when I was 12 years old, I weighed 200 pounds. I probably had me some pretty big boy boobies happening there, I would think. Maybe it was about just kind of getting the right equipment or something. I don't know. But I think she perceived it as, oh my goodness, my boy has turned into a sex fiend and he's only a little boy and what's wrong with him? I think that's kind of how she thought. And then I know that a lot of people, if you talk about pleasure, the first thing they go to is sex. And sex is certainly a pleasure, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are pleasure. So my question for you, and I want you are a much more educated man than I, Daniel. I mean, you're an archbishop, you're an author, you're the bushman. You know these things. So my question for you is pleasure an evil or is it a good?
Wow, it's a big question. Let me just begin by asking the question, have you been in the zone of pleasure?
Have I been in the zone of pleasure? Is that what you said?
Yes. Have you been in an environment where you felt pleasure?
Sure. Yes.
Help people understand what pleasure look like. What is it?
Okay. Well, pleasure is a piece of really nice chocolate that you let melt in your mouth, and it's like 5 minutes. You taste that chocolate absorbing through your tongue and into your body. That's pleasure.
So pleasure is an engagement of your five senses.
Yes.
So there's something sensual about it. So
yes.
That in pleasure, by your definition, is that you touch something, you taste something, you smell something, you see something, and you have a sensation of being carried over and being surrendered to the passions, or being surrendered to is a state of being totally, it's an idyllic state. You're totally integrated with self, and it does produce physical sensation, that the somatic reactions. Right?
Yes.
Telling me. So it's something that has to do, whatever it is someone will say about pleasure, at least the one that everybody knows, is that it has to do with a full engagement of your five senses. Now, somebody can listen to a music and could just have that full engagement of selfhood and it can drive you to a state of being where you are really okay. That is like the level of stress compared to the level of anxiety. Basically, we all take stress, and anxiety has to do what we are projecting to the future, right? So it's like time is no more. It's like time stands still. Well, and if you in physics, they tell you about what time is, there is a distance, there is quite a lot of velocity, but whatever it is, that everything is just still, and you just enjoy the moment.
Very
Right?
contentment, right? A lot of contentment in that moment, right?
Somebody will call it contentment. I don't know if it is, but it's like, but you can name it, but that's pleasure. So,
Yes.
so there is something about that now that people think is ungainly,
Right. Right.
goes, and for some
Like
reason,
my mother did, I think in that case, my mother thought that, oh, pleasure. What's wrong with this boy, right? So, and by the way, I'm not saying my mother she was a fine woman and a good mother. And any woman who chooses to keep a little person in their body and grow them inside their body, and then it looked like a pretty uncomfortable process to deliver those children, and then take care of them for decades afterwards. Love mothers of all of them, right? That we all came that way, and they're amazing.
and certainly it was not just out of pure bliss and pleasure, because there was quite a loss of pain and the travail that come with it. But pleasure seemed to be a place of no travail at all.
Mm-hmm.
But travail is like a state of being like in bliss, in the zone. So now, now when we look at it, they seem to be, well, that's something that occurred to each one of us. You have seen, it's like you've been there, the movies, or maybe in person, you see a monkey they ate something, there's a little fruit, and then they're all elephant, and they are like in the zone, like days in it. So, but they seem to be somehow in history, maybe from religion, that there is something vain about pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
That anybody who relishes and love and crave for pleasure has lost their balance. There's something, they have lost something that is real. There's something. So in that, religion and holiness consists in denying self pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You may have gotten that, or maybe that the fact that pleasure could actually, it could cause so much pain. Pleasure can actually lead you into a zone of being that your judgment is impaired. I don't know if you have been to pleasure. Do you think your judgment is impaired?
Well, I don't I don't know. Like, you know what? My experiences of pleasure are maybe limited. Maybe you have more experiences than I do. I mean, if you think of experiences where it doesn't involve drugs or alcohol, then I don't think you're like, if that's a way to get to pleasure, right? Which it certainly is a release from this present moment for people who are hurting, right? Drugs or alcohol, or I'm not saying the best tool, but a tool they use to escape from this present moment or to get relief from this present moment. So there, your judgment is certainly impaired. But if brother Daniel gave me a big hug and I found that to be a beautiful sensation that I very much enjoyed, I don't think my judgment be impaired, except maybe I would feel more joy in my heart. And I think that's all right. I think I'll go with that.
Yeah. So why is it that society, at least maybe as you like the society that your mom represented, is
Mhm.
against pleasure?
I don't know. So then now, you feel, from a philosophical perspective, there was like what Epicureans were a philosophical sect, were they not? What were they all about, Daniel?
Curious. Yeah, it's all about a little bit of food, a little bit of sex, a little bit of sleep to be happy. It's all about adding and to it's like soothing your senses and
Mm-hmm.
bathing and baptizing yourself into so much just pleasure, where your senses bathe into it. But again, is that really what life is all about? If you define your life as being uh, pleasure, pleasure as the end of life, then your life is just the pursuit of pleasure.
Right. Sure.
And
Exactly.
for that generation, many of them have thought that maybe the pursuit of pleasure is vain, is ungainly, and
Right.
in fact, many people think that in that time, actually, the you gain more by surrendering yourself, by not pursuing pleasure, but maybe actually by duty instead, right?
By duty instead. Sure.
And it's all about duty. It's about, in some people think it's about pain. It's all about it. But I think it's really when you mix pleasure and religion that you get into all these message of really the mixed message about pleasure.
And
Because
why is that, Daniel? Why is that? Like, it's not one of the seven deadly sins of the Catholic religion, right? Lust is, but not pleasure.
well, yeah, it seemed like, well, it's part of it, but in the end, it seemed like you are too grounded in the body. The whole thing about spirituality for a season in the human journey was about denying the body,
Right. Right.
not
Right. Right.
any bodily pleasure, anything that enhances or pull you to that level of sensuality was evil purely.
Detracts you away from your spiritual connection, kind of a thing, would be the thought. Is that correct?
That's right. It's like it seemed like God was not in the pleasure thing. It's because you were to deny the flesh and embrace, well, the spiritual. So there was something like a dichotomy between the body and flesh and spirit, what is spiritual and what is natural. And
Right.
so that's why we have gone the whole distance of trying to really tell people that pleasure was bad. It was a domain of temptation. It was a domain where satanic oppression could manifest, and you needed to overcome the flesh. You needed to overcome Satan. And so that's in part some of the thought that went into it. And so we begin to regulate it. And not only that, in the monastic area, asceticism was a big deal, where you deny yourself quite a lot and you devote yourself to the reading of scripture, the service of humanity, and your fellow human. And so you devoted to Holy Scripture, to reading, meditation, serving, all these good stuff.
Right.
See,
Right.
and some people will go into quite far. Interestingly, I was reading an article by Hannah something. She's a feminist, and she's talking about anorexia and bulimia. And she traces in English, from English, she talks about 13,600 people that they admitted in the hospital. There's found that is it 90% of them, they thought that their illness was due to the fact of religious attachment, that, you deny, you don't want to feed the body, or and so in that it was in part due to religious and to theological teaching that was many way taken off context, obviously. So because obviously you have the monks, some of them who fast, and many of us, when we say I want to have a spiritual encounter, what do? You want to deny yourself earthly pleasures. You want to stop eating. You want to starve yourself. You want to fast for 40 days. Christ, obviously, he did that. And there's a sense of really denying self food. And guess what happened? He was tempted by the devil. And again, so the conversation, the nature of the conversation in those early periods was like, to gain access to the divine, you got to deny the flesh. You got to put your earthly pleasure aside, and in that you will encounter the divine. And I think for many of us, that is what really led us to have this negative perspective, at least, about pleasure. At least when I retrace my own
Mm-hmm.
journey into spirituality and to religion and into, well, the relationship with the divine and us. And I haven't said that. I have been in many places where fasting and prayer have really helped me discipline my appetite. If you go to the scripture, you have the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were in Babylon. Part of the whole thing, they refused to say yes to the meal of the king, the wine of the king, and they ate their own of their own meal, salad and so on, vegetarian meal. And you notice something. The point being made in that text was that the first point of resistance of being truly spiritually disciplined is to discipline your appetite. And that's where you get a lot of those stuff. Having said that, I do have quite a lot of question about pleasure, again, in today's society. But I don't know if there's any question that anybody has about the sense of historically how human beings live and dealt with pleasure, and how denial of pleasure and spirituality really manifested in praxis, in our practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, we have our number posted. If someone wants to give us a call, we put it on the Facebook post, so anybody can call in and ask us a question related to this topic. So religion and pleasure, there's that conflict there, that if you pursue pleasure as a person, as a man of God, perhaps you're breaking, or you're not committed enough to your relationship with your creator, kind of a thing. I understand that. And that's kind of the origins. And is that a healthy belief now, to have the best human life? Is that a healthy belief?
Like, I guess the question is like, well, we are called to wholeness, right? That's to be
Yes.
whole. And the Garden of Eden, this idyllic place, and where being and doing was united. You did who you be, and there was that integrative, like you were really equal to yourself. And I think there is a zone. There is a pleasure. It's heavenly.
Heavenly.
It's a question of linguistic, right? It's a question
Right.
of somebody say theology itself. In many ways, is all about. It's a grammar. It's like a language that you get to speak, and so. I do not believe that there is anything about pleasure that is ungodly and unheavenly. And I don't believe God is there in heaven looking down into earth, into his creation, and saying, you're having way too much fun.
Yes.
Sometimes this asceticism that we have, it has really it had a profound effect on so many of us. If you grew up in church, it was don't dance. Don't do music. Certainly, when I grew up, part of the whole thing, some of the influences of religion was don't play music, don't play drums. But there is something healing about music. There's something healing about art. There's something healing about moving your body. There is something quite healing about being touched. There's something wonderful about it. And I think it did cause many disorder in, at least and it probably is causing more disorder in many people's living and how they be and do their life today. So I always believe that if somebody want to do a Nazarite vow, so that means for a season you say, you deny yourself, you say, I'm just going to seek, I'm going to discipline myself, I'm going to seek to intensify my connection with the divine, with God. That's okay. But
sure.
But
you had mentioned about fasting. How long have you fasted for?
I fasted for more than 40 days before.
You fasted for more than 40 days?
Yes.
Wow. And then just water. You just drank water is all.
Yeah, sometime, yeah, some I have done for more than 20 days without water.
20 days without water.
Mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
and many
I
people,
fast I fast 1 day a month. I figure that's a big deal to fast 1 day a month. But 40 days, my goodness. Okay.
yeah,
And so that
and,
was this a big spiritual awakening for you?
and it didn't make me any spiritual. Look at me, I look so like down to earth, huh? I know, but it's what happened in me, what grows in me when I discipline myself, when I actually could manage myself, and and many people do it for health reasons and all those stuff, but I do believe that for many of us, at least in my spiritual journey, fasting has been very helpful, but it's not for everybody. Hmm?
Hmm.
It's not for many people abstaining for certain things, from drinking, abstaining from like a loss of like just really mindless activity. It has helped them grow and connect spiritually, because there is a spiritual side to us, to who we are, and sometimes I think we neglect that the spiritual part of our being way too much, and we take it for granted, and it is sad. I'm always for psycho-spiritual health, that your body, your psychological, your psychology, your body, your mind, your spirit is important, because it's important to be whole, you know.
Right.
Now,
Yes. Yes.
even addicted, it can be like work. Sometimes there's something like the whole notion of taking the Sabbath or the Shabbat. I mean, the seventh day don't work, is that you actually rest from it, so that you can reconnect to body, mind, soul, and spirit, and in that reconnection, and there is the integrity of self.
You know, we've touched on this before, but disconnection is like the disease of our times. Disconnection with on ourself, disconnection with our brothers and sisters, right? Those disconnections are like all our social ills
That's right.
and our personal ills.
Yes, and I think in part, some people see pleasure as a window to addiction. You see, so
Sure.
if
Yeah.
we keep you from pleasure, certainly we can actually keep you from moving into addiction, because once you're there, you want more, and somebody who is maybe you become addicted to a loss of process addict, or maybe like in the sense you work, and you're seeking some kind of pleasure, that fulfillment, and some people do, they're addicted to it, and some people it's chemical addiction, in that you are pursuing something, and there's something you want to fill the void in you through a loss of doing, or chemical addiction, and so on. And that's a reality that we are dealing with, and some people escape from their body, through drugs and all this other medication and chemical stimulant to escape the body. But again, they're escaping in order to connect elsewhere. And I think in part, historically, many people have thought that if we reduce pleasure, it will be a preventative means. So in the Old Testament laws, that someone talk about it as, or in the Pharisee, where the Pharisee were teaching, that we want to put a fence around the law. For example, if a law said, do not travel in the day of the Shabbat, they would say, well, don't go out of your house. So they want to make sure you don't travel, right?
Right.
In many ways, like perhaps some of the teaching about pleasure is all about keeping us from giving too much into sensuality,
Too much. Say that again, Daniel. What was that?
into sensuality, too much into the senses.
Right.
Some people talk about the 1960s. You probably was here. I don't know what was going on. It seemed to be a happy, hippie, whatever it is, that folks just go nut. Were you alive in that time? Did you participate? You can confess your sin to me.
Yes. Well, as much as a 12-year-old could have. Yes, Daniel. So I wasn't much of a party animal as a 200-pound 12-year-old boy. So no.
Okay, so then that's good. So you were not present into it, but I did hear that these were quite. It was quite incredible, and when people added LSD, the drugs, and the partying scene, and that people lose their mind in it. But
So here's what, to sum up what you said so far, we're saying that some religious interpretations would say pleasure or sensuality, even interest in the body, detracts you away from your spiritual connection. Further, that pleasure used to the excess, or pleasure desired to the excess, as in the case of love, would also be a bad. It would be an evil for us to have pleasure in that sense, where it became the dominating thing of our life, that was kind of became an addiction. Those are things where pleasure would be evil. Correct?
that's correct. That is right. Uh, it, I think if there's anything I also want to add is that some of the illness that we are really dealing with, at least from Hannah's article that I mentioned here, they talk about how it truly that some people take that theological perspective as a reason to give themselves up to certain addiction and disorder. Obviously, like food addictions, like maybe some people like bulimia and all those stuff that and that
Mm-hmm.
really we need to be careful that there's many of those. So there's so many of our problem due to our theology of pleasure. So you have to have a sense: is God in it? Is God so against pleasure? I doubt that God is. In fact, if anything, God is in it. I totally believe it. But anything can be depraved. It can be taken to an extreme.
Sure. I mean, from your perspective, it would make sense that our creator, who gave us these senses, would want us to explore those senses and use them. Like you could use our senses to experience pain too, but why would we want to choose more of that? So there are senses that we have with this body that we have, that we can utilize in order to have a life affirming experience. Do you think
Yes,
that makes sense?
that's right. And I think that's why Paul says that Paul or Peter, he said, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of light.
Mm.
And I think that there's something beautiful about it.
Sure.
Whatever is good, think about those things. Whatever is perfect, whatever is uplifting. And that's why I think God gave us all the means to be able to attain that joy, pleasure, and all those stuff. And
Mhm.
and again, lots of people, whenever we talk about pleasure, people want you to avoid talking about sex because they don't like it.
Right.
I don't know
Yes.
anybody who doesn't like sex. Well, they need therapy.
Fair statement. Fair statement. So
It's
basically, oh, go ahead.
God's gift to the people of God. This is divine gift. Is God's gift. And there is nothing evil, inherently evil about that. And it's a gift of God. And I think sometimes it's an insult to the divine when we actually trivialize that. And that God gave it to build community, to build a bonding among us human. And we must not dismiss that. And we must receive it as a gift of God,
Mm-hmm.
his people, for his creation. And he didn't make a mistake by doing that. And there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing dirty about that. Sex is wonderful, it's beautiful. I advise it and I recommend it. And especially you're married, like I recommend it. And it's a problem for in the married couple is that for lots of people that I see that they don't have it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of married people, they come to when we talk. So the main problem is that they're not having it. They have been told, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. And when they get married, they say, I don't want to have it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I think it's sad. Someday we need to talk about this. And I think we need to just look like straight in the eyes of people and just tell them it's a good thing.
Sure.
Good and perfect gift. Sex is a good and perfect gift from God.
Exactly. And it's pleasure you're creating for your partner, pleasure you're receiving from your partner. How could that be a bad thing, right?
Yes, and that's it. And I think for when we begin, I think for my faith is that God in Christ, God come to redeem all things, including my sexualities, including my senses, is redeemed, and it's used for God's good and perfect purposes on earth. And God purposes on earth is not about me going to church 25/7 or
Mm-hmm.
24/7, as you say. No, but God gift for me and God's calling for me is that I be all that I am called to be and to become in the fullness of it, in the majesty of it, in the grandeur of it. And
Mm-hmm.
we are at that point, we are living for his glory. And whether my sexuality, my humanity, my frailty, my imperfection is all to his glory. And I think we need not apologize for that at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nicely said. So I think here's what I'm understanding us to say here, Daniel. That pleasure is a life affirming experience that if used where it doesn't dominate your life, but it's just something that you access to get the most of life's experience, and it is not harmful to anyone else, like you achieving pleasure or seeking pleasure isn't harmful to anybody else, pleasure is a pretty good thing. Would you agree?
It's divine.
It's divine. Love it. Love it.
And it's a spectrum, eh? If what's the alternative of pleasure? You want pain?
No, not me. No thanks.
Like they don't like it. Like I said, do you want pain? They say we don't like it. Like but there's a disorder where people find more joy in pain, which I understand. But again, when I say what's the alternative? To live ill, to live no God's sufficiency, and he fuel us, he redeems, and we ought to live redemptively. That means to be wholesome people, doing who we be. I know your time is up and you want to tell me that's your time, but I just want to say we do to be whole. And that means to embrace our humanity, to never apologize for it, to embrace who we be, and there is joy in it. And God is not mad at you. The dude is not, he's not angry at you. He's not out to get you. You know what? Get off it. Just rejoice and do the very best that you call to be. Be a whole person.
Daniel, I'm going to try my best to be a whole person all week until we meet again next Thursday. And then we're going to explore this topic in a little bit more detail. All right. We've got kind of a working definition. Now I have another follow-up question we'll discuss next episode.
All right. Let's do
All right.
it.